Hello everyone and welcome to my session for Azure Back to School 2023. So my name is Brian. I'm going to be your host today as we go through this, and you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Brian L. Gorman. Of course, this is the Azure Back to School event, and so ultimately we're looking for the Azure Back to School website here. And on the Azure Back to School website, you can find all of the information about this event, azureback2school.github.io, including the full schedule, which is for the 2023 session. And today's session is actually going to be Wednesday, 9/6/2023, and we're doing utilizing private endpoints from Azure Services to create a solution architecture that is secure. So we will create an app service, a database, and a key vault, and we will connect to the key vault from the app service to get the database connection string, and we will build that first in the public web, and then we will lock it down and make it more secure. All right, so before we dive in, I just want to mention that I was thinking about doing a write-up for this, and then I realized that Greg Rossetti has already done one in January that would help out with everything we're doing today. So if you want to, go out to gregorsetti.com and look for his entry on the 16th of January 2023 on Azure Web App using Azure SQL, using private endpoints to have a full walkthrough of everything we're about to do live in this video for the database part. And obviously, I'm going to add a key vault to give it a little more robust security, but this would get you started and give you a nice walkthrough if you haven't seen this already. Also, look for Gregor's event, the Festive Tech Calendar, which will be coming up later this year as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and create a resource group here. So the resource group will just be called something like Azure Back to School 2023. And let's just do this. Azure Back to School, Secure Solutions, 2023. And on the tags, we don't need any, so we'll go ahead and create that resource group. So we're going to need 3 resources for this to work. We're going to need a database, we're going to need a key vault, and we're going to need a web app. And the database and the key vault will take a little bit of time, so I'm going to do an Azure SQL database. Now you could deploy the SQL and the web at the same time, but I like to do them individually because I get a little more control over what I'm creating. So I'm just going to create a simple database here in the resource group. We'll call it the AB2S Secure Web DB. Actually, that's called AB2S 2023. So it looks, really crazy and awesome. AB2S 2023 Secure Web DB. I'm going to go ahead and create a new server called AB2S 2023 Secure Web DB Server. And we'll use SQL authentication. We'll just call this web user. And the password will just be a simple password that I can remember easily. And that meets all the criteria. And that will make the server. And then it'll start off with a little more expensive server than I want. So I'm going to go ahead and use a different type of server here. We're going to go to development and we're going to switch this to a basic plan so that it's nice and cheap. Now, obviously, if this was a production workload, that wouldn't be enough, but this is just a simple demo. So this will be just fine for $5 a month. We're going to keep the database locked down with no access, and that will cause us a problem, and we'll see how to fix that later. We'll make no changes for security or additional settings or tags, and we'll go ahead and just create that database. So as that's creating, let's go ahead and create a key vault. So we'll make a key vault here. So what I'm going to do is just make this a little bit bigger. We'll create a new key vault here, and this will be the Azure Back to School. So we'll call this the AB2S 2023 Secure Web Solution Vault. Let's see if that's too long. Okay, that's too long, so let's take off the URE, SecWeb Solon Vault. Okay, awesome. So the name doesn't really matter, it just needs to make sense to us, and that's going to work fine. So we're going to turn off this 90 days down to 7, and we're going to leave this purge protection as disabled. And access configuration will switch to vault policy, since that's what we're most likely used to, and we'll create other policies later. For now, we're going to leave this open to the web, which is not a good idea, but in order for our solution to work first as we create it, we'll have it open to the web, and then we will lock it down and show how it breaks when it's locked down, and then fix that by creating the private endpoints we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and create this vault. While the vault's creating, let's go ahead and create an Azure App Service. So this will just be a simple web app. and the web app will be in our resource group, and we'll call this the AB2S 2023 Secure Solutions Web. And we'll put this into .NET 7. And now you will need to be on a standard plan. So I'm just going to leave these defaults as ASP, Back to School, Secure Solution. Actually, sometimes I like to just repeat these just to make sure I didn't accidentally have one or something. I doubt I had that, but you never know. So school, so ASP A2BS, and then Secure Solutions 2023 or something like that. So that's my plan. And it's going to be a standard plan. With the standard plan, we're going to be able to do networking. So if you're not at least this S1 plan, you'd be in big trouble. So don't use a free or a shared or a B1. And then, of course, you can use a more expensive plan in a production workload. But at minimum, you need it to be an S1 plan. We're also not going to use slots today, nor are we going to use any kind of automated deployment. I'm going to right-click and publish a simple MVC web app that I already created, which has a simple database for identity and also an object called university with 5 seeded universities in it, so we can see really quickly that we're working against the database. The web app we're going to leave wide open with public access on and network injection off. We're going to go ahead and let it default to whatever the application insights is that it wants to create, and no tags again, so we'll go ahead and create this plan as well. So at this point, we're creating a database, and it looks like the database is done. We're creating a vault. I forgot to press play on that one, so we'll go ahead and kick that one off. And we're creating a web app. So the database is done, which is awesome, which means that we can see here that we can get the connection string. So we're going to need this connection string, and I'm going to put this into a notepad off screen and replace the your password part right here with the password that I know is mine. And I'll get that into my clipboard so that as soon as this vault is done, I can go ahead and create a secret. So here's the vault. I'm going to create a secret. The secret is going to be the name of it's going to be the AB2S Secure Web Solutions Database Connection String. It's a really long secret name, but it really doesn't matter other than it might be in the URI a little bit. And you don't have to fill in the type, but I'm going to go ahead and put string there anyway. I'm going to create it, and I'm going to review it, take a look at it, and make sure it looks like a SQL Server database connection that you would expect. It does. Also, we want to get the secret identifier. So mine's a little bit obscured here. I have a mask on, but that secret identifier gets me the link to the URI that we need. And so let me do this. I will turn this off for 1 second, just so you can see that it's just a link to the secret, and ultimately at the end of it is that's the version number. So we want to take this part from the end of the word of the connection string. That part is the important part of the URI that we're going to need to map our database connection string for the web app. So let me turn this back on. And our web app is done. So on our web app, we're going to go to the configuration tab. And on the configuration tab, we're going to create a new connection string. The name of the connection string is going to be default connection, because that is our typical connection string name in a typical simple web app. We're going to use this wrapper called @microsoft.keyvault. And we're going to say secret URI equals, and we're going to paste in that link that we just got from the secret. So it should be something like HTTPS, the name of your vault.azure.net, secret's the name of your secret. You don't want the slash and version number on the end. If it's there, it would be okay. It just means that if it ever gets updated, you might be using an out of date or invalid secret. So I also checked deployment slot setting. Again, we're not using slots, but what that's going to do is let me know that if I ever do, this will be sticky to the production slot, and I can either share the database and just recreate it, or I can create a new database and have a completely different connection on a slot. So that's going to try to set up and try to connect to Microsoft Key Vault. And so eventually here, this will tell us, it should tell us it's going to be an error because we don't have the web app open, or excuse me, we don't have the SQL Server open for connections at this point. So on our vault, nothing needs to change right now. It will in a second, but this default connection, actually it's not even going to try to figure it out because the web app can't connect to the vault. So let's make that possible. So in order to do that, I go to the identity on the web app, and we're going to turn the identity on and save that. Give it a system managed identity. This will allow us to assign RBAC permissions against that identity, including the role. And so in here is an object ID. It's just a GUID. You actually really don't need it, but if you grab that, you can find this solution easy. You could also just type in the name of the web, and that name of the web would probably be an easier way to find your identity. But either way, you need that identity, and you need it from the Key Vault. So we'll flip back to the Key Vault for a second. And on the access policies, we're going to create a new policy for get secret only. They don't need to do anything other than get, and they need that to make it happen. So on here, then you could type in that object ID or the name of your web. So AB2S 2023. So you can see that I have that AB2S 2023 Secure Solutions Web and the ID of 278, whatever that is. But that's the web solution that I'm looking for. If I typed in that object ID, I'm just curious. The object ID is a little bit different, but will it find the same one? It sure does. And that's what we want to make sure we have the right one. And we'll go ahead and create that. So now that web solution has get secret permission. So if we go back to the web, we might need to restart it for things to kind of figure out that they're working or not. And as we do that, though, we still don't have access to the SQL Server. So there's going to be a big problem with that because the SQL Server is not allowing connections at this point. All right, so this is going to take a minute probably to figure itself out while I'm going pretty fast here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and deploy my app. But let me just show you what this app does real quick locally. Everything's going to just automatically migrate when it's connected to the database, and it will just work at Azure because it's just a simple app. And all it does is it stores these 5 universities and then orders them by the year founded and prints out their information on the default page. There's nothing fancy about this. You could also register and log in a user, but this is just a really easy way to say that our database is actually connected and working. These are stored in a table in the database. So to get this going, I'm going to go ahead and just right-click and publish this out to Azure. Now, ordinarily, I would recommend CI/CD, of course, but for today, we just want to get this thing out there as quick as possible. So let's build a publish profile. And we'll add that here. I'm just going to go ahead and select my Azure subscription into a Windows App Service plan. So there it is, my Secure Solutions Web. And we'll even deploy as a zip package, sure. Go ahead and finish that. And of course, we got to double click to publish that. So publishing will actually restart the web and make it try to connect to the database. Just so you see this, I have the migrations automatically being run here. So that's going to cause it to need a database connection to even work. So what I'll expect to see is a 500.30 when the web app comes up because that doesn't work. So let's see if this figured out it's a Key Vault yet. It did not. And let me make sure I just typed everything correctly. Microsoft.keyvault. So you can always go to the advanced edit too and take a look at Microsoft.keyvault. Secret URI. And this needs to be RI capitalized. That's the problem. And then the link to that secret. So, okay, so it is a Key Vault reference and it is connected now. I realized I had stopped the video, just waiting. And what I realized is that I had forgotten to put the right paren at the end of this as well. So it's kind of finicky, but now that it's working, it's awesome, right? So Microsoft.keyvault, secret URI, and then all of that stuff. So we are connected to the Key Vault. However, we should still be getting a 500. And the reason is because even though we have a valid connection string, provided I didn't make any typos in the connection string, the database isn't letting us through. So back on the database, if I go to the server firewall, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the networking tab here, basically. And on the networking tab, I'm going to allow selected networks. And I'm not going to put anything in, but I'm just going to say allow Azure Services and resources to access this server for now. So right now, we're not adding anything to the network. We're not adding any firewall rules. So my local client still can't connect. But this is going to allow trusted Azure Services through. So Key Vault and Azure App Service, basically the Azure App Service using that connection string should be able to connect at this point. So we'll let that sit for a second. We will restart the web so that it can try to go out and grab that connection once again. and we'll give it a second here and see if it works once it's restarted. Sometimes it takes a little while for network rules to propagate, so you just have to be a little patient. So there we go, we're building. Let's see if we get in this time. There we go. So our page is working. If we wanted, we could register users, log in users, but we can see that we have data coming out of the database at this point. And you just have to trust me that this is coming out of the database. But that proves our database is working, the migrations worked, so our website's up and running. So at this point, we've deployed a SQL server, and it is only available to essentially selected networks, but right now nothing's being through except for Azure Services access to the service, which gave the web app access. The web app's going to the key vault. The key vault's on the public web. The web app's on the public web. And basically, the SQL server has a firewall on it, which says let everything through publicly if it's on an Azure service that's an Azure trusted service. So the final steps we want to do to complete this activity is to start locking things down. All right, so let's go back to no public access here. So in fact, I'm going to make sure that this is unchecked. So go back to no public access on the database. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a private link now. So we'll just give it private access. So in order for us to have a private link though, we need a VNet. So the first thing we need to do is just go ahead and get a VNet. And on my VNet, I'm just going to create a virtual network here, and we'll put it in our group. The virtual network name is just going to be AB2S Secure Solutions VNet. We'll put it on the East US so that everything's in the same region. Make sure all your resources that you want on a VNet or access to are going to be in the same region. That's a pretty critical thing. So I didn't configure any subnets or anything, so we're going to let this deploy, and then we're going to go back and fix a couple things. So it's just going to use the default address range, and that's okay. We could have modified that to a different address range if we had any kind of concern about overlap, but we shouldn't in this simple demo. So on my resource here, it's in the 10.0.0.0. Obviously, could have used a different one. Let's look at our subnets. We have the default. Let's create a subnet for the web. 10.0.1.4, and we're not going to do anything special to it. We'll just create the subnet for now. And we'll create another subnet here when that's done for the data. And that'll be 10.0.2. And then we'll do another subnet for the vault. So just so we have subnets that are supposed to be delegated, and it really doesn't matter too much here, but we'll do this way. Web data and vault now all have their own subnets. So the database server needs to create a private endpoint now in order to connect. And in order to do that, it had to have that VNet first, and it had to be the same region as the server. So we're East US, so we're good. So the private endpoint here, we're just going to call this AB2S DB private link, something like that. Let's do AB2S DB private link. So you'll see it's going to create a number of resources for this. So you might consider putting it in its own group if you wanted to maybe try to keep them together, but this is going to be pretty straightforward. So we're going to do the SQL Server on this one. And then ultimately the virtual network we want to put this on is data. And we're going to let that be dynamic, and we're not going to use an application security group. We're going to let it pre-configure a private DNS zone, so we don't have to change anything here. And we can just go ahead and run tags, review and create, and we'll kick off the creation of this private endpoint. It does take a few minutes for the private endpoint to be created, so just keep that in mind. You may have to wait for that to spin for a minute. Also, I'd like to point out that just creating the private endpoint isn't going to be enough for this to connect. So what we'll also need to do is put our app service onto the network. So while that's spinning, I'd like to go back to the app service, and we'll go to the networking tab here on the app service as well. And on this networking tab, what we're going to do is we're going to add some VNet integration. So that way this web can be able to connect through a VNet that exists already. So we're going to integrate the VNet that we just created, the Secure Solutions VNet, and the subnet we're going to use for this one is the web. So you can see how data is already used, so we wouldn't be able to use that one. So here's web, and we'll hit OK. So the private endpoint does again take a few minutes to spin up, so we just have to be patient. So we have our VNet integration on our website. We're still going to be using the key vault, which is still on the public backbone for now, but the database will be inaccessible until we have this private link connected, and then it should only be accessible through the network. So if I restarted this right now, and we're still kind of in the middle of everything, what I should have done is restarted it prior to making sure it was broken again, which I forgot to do. But you could try that if you want. But ultimately, the web app should have been down once we locked down the network for the database until this private link is completed. Yeah, so we got an error because we can't connect to the database basically at this point. So it's kind of a strange place to see the error. I almost would have expected to see the 500.3 again, but I'm doing this in a weird order and maybe it started to connect here. So we have the endpoint done. We can try one more time here now. The service is unavailable. And let's try to restart now that we have everything in place again. With the DB link now being set up on the database, and it's in the network, the app being in the network, having this restarted. We're still using the connection string to the key vault, which is available. So there's the default connection. Key vault reference is still trying to figure itself out at this point. And the key vault reference has resolved. So if I go to the page now, we should be back and running against the database, and we are. So our database is up and working. The database is locked down again. If we go back to the database, we can prove that it's basically locked down completely, in that it won't let us do anything unless we're on a private link. There's no public access at all. There's no secret link to allow Azure Services through. It's simply that private link that has let us through. So that takes care of the database, and that just leaves the key vault to get it locked down. I have everything ready to go here. We have completed our VNet. We've completed our DB server lockdown. We have our web, and it's using that vault connection. So I wanted to stop there for a second because I have the connection already set here on a vault that has allowed public access. So I have seen some weird timing things and other things where the vault takes a little while before it kind of understands it's not supposed to be public. So I'm actually going to create a second vault that's going to be completely locked down, and we're just going to use that to demonstrate that it's going to work the way that we would expect it to. So this will be our vault going forward. So we're just going to get this figured out. So the key vault name here is just going to be AB2S. How about we just call it SecWeb? I needs to be different, so I can't remember what I named the other one, 2023 or something like that. So this will actually be the one we're going to use going forward, and the pricing tier is going to be the same. Set this to the same 7 days, and we're going to go ahead and do a vault policy again, and we're going to go ahead and not have any public access at all. We're not going to create the public or the private link at the moment. We're just going to prove that it doesn't work first. So we're going to review and create this thing. And it'll be really fun because it's completely locked down, so it won't even know who I am in order to do stuff against it. All right, so if I try to do anything against this, it's going to actually tell me that you can't because public access is disabled and not for a trusted service. So what I'm going to do for the time being is simply allow public access from specific virtual networks and IP addresses. So we could integrate the virtual network this way as well. I'm not sure how awesome that would work. But what we can do here for this is just add my IP address. So give me 1 second. And then I can apply that. So the only thing that can connect is currently my IP. So even though the other web shouldn't work, I'm going to go ahead and recreate the secret. So this is just going to be the secure web DB connection string. And the secret is the same value we entered before. So that connection string that we know should work. And the content type is string. And we'll create it. And then we will double check the secret, make sure it looks like it's SQL Server database connection string, and it does. And then we will also get the URI for that secret because we're going to update the current web to use that. So that will take care of that secret. Again, we want to strip off the version number, just so that if the version's ever updated, we don't have to worry about that. And we'll go back to our app service here. And on the app service, on the configuration for the connection string, we're going to modify this secret right here to just point to the new vault secret. And hopefully this time I don't have any errors in my typos or anything like that. I'll save that, and we should see at this point a key vault reference that's blocked. We should get an error. So I'm also going to go ahead, well, let's let that fail first, and then I'm jumping ahead and getting ahead of myself enough here that I want to wait to make sure that that's not going to work. It should fail because the app itself I never gave it a policy. I never added the policy. So cool. So we're broken. So if we went to the web page now, we should probably see an error. Exactly. Cool. I can go back to the vault, and on the vault, I need my access policy. So add my user, get permission. Once again, this is going to be my web app, so I can just use the object ID or the name, and I'm going to add that to the vault, and the application will have get permission. We'll create that, and that should give it permission. If we go back to the web and restart the web, we should still see an error, because even though we have access now, we would expect that we don't have access through the fact that it's not public. So if we look at this, so this is still saying the managed identity is not working. And then also I want to turn off my private IP now. So on the vault itself, what I want to do is go back to the networking tab and make this disable public access completely. No allowed circuit, no private endpoints, so there should be nobody able to connect to this app or this key vault at all right now. So now it's saying access to key vault denied. Still saying the stuff is there. So I'm assuming it's denied because the vault doesn't have integration at this point. So let's go back to the vault and go to its networking, and let's create a private link for the web app to be able to connect. So we'll call this AB2S Vault Private Link. And this resource will have to connect to the key vault. And it'll find that I have a key vault here for the one that I'm looking for, which is the new one, AB2S-SecWeb-Secrets 2023. So make sure you select the right one if you had two like I did. If you're just using one, not a big deal. Grab the right vault, make sure you put it into the vault subnet, and then dynamically enable all of that, dynamically route, and that should give us connection to the key vault through a private link with no public access to that key vault at all. Again, this will take a minute to deploy, so we'll just pause the video. All right, so the private link was created. So now we have our SQL Server's private link, we have our Key Vault's private link, and now our web app probably needs to restart just to get everything reset, everything up to date. It might have picked it up automatically, but hopefully we'll be able to get our Key Vault reference figured out here as that propagates through our DNS. And it did, so we're good. So now we should be able to go to our page, and once again it should hit the startup here and run the migrations. If there are any, there aren't at this point, but it should be able to connect to the database now because it should be able to get to the Key Vault, which is on a private link. So it should get to the database through the connection string, which is also on a private link. And that means that our database is locked down, our Key Vault is locked down. And the only thing that's not really locked down at this point is our website. So our website is available to the public, and that gives us the access to it through this public link. And then ultimately, the rest of it's integrated through the network. So at least at this point, our vault and our database are secure, and the only thing available through the public right now is the web. Now, to just kind of finish this up, if you wanted to make the web more secure, at this point you would go to the access restrictions, you would take off public access, allow any rules like your own IP if you want to see it, or if there's another rule you need to let in here. And then what you could do is add something like a web application gateway, which would have a public-facing IP and you would then allow this app to be directed to from that public-facing IP from the web application gateway, and that would get you access to your website even if this was turned to on. And basically then the web would also only be accessible through the application gateway, which allows you to put a web application firewall or a WAF on top of it. But this is as far as we're going to go today. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was useful. I hope you now understand how easy it can be to easily integrate privacy into your work so that your websites can connect to your databases and your storage accounts and your key vaults via private link. Once again, I'd like to thank Dwayne and Derek for having me on this event, and I hope that this information was useful to you. Have a great rest of the Azure Back to School event.